A blaze in the Gulf. 2 supertankers attacked by Iran, rammed by powerboats packed with explosives. Here, an attack drone hits an oil storage depot in Oman, and 3 ships crippled too. The war's new battleground, the Strait of Hormuz. An Iranian propaganda video shows off an underground armada, with Tehran warning its enemies not 1 litre of oil will pass through the strait.
Operation Epic Fury!
The US president declaring victory.
And we've won. Let me say it, we've won.
But still no word on when the fighting will end.
We don't want to leave early, do we? We got to finish the job, right?
The US says it's hit more than 5,000 targets in Iran. Iran claims double that.
We've reviewed an alert that came within the last couple of weeks, Kira, just recently from the FBI to law enforcement agencies up and down the California coastline, warning that Iran is aspiring now to perhaps launch some kind of a retaliatory attack on the U.S. mainland using drones on the West Coast. The alert that we reviewed said an uncorroborated report suggested that unidentified Mexican cartel leaders had authorized attacks using drones carrying explosives, so they know that capability exists. And this separate alert that we've reviewed, Kira, says that Iran has those same kinds of aspirations. So the U.S. has broadly known for some time that drones could be deployed against the homeland. We know that Iran has been using drones significantly in this 12-day-old war with the United States. That's what killed the first 6 U.S. service members in this war. But now the FBI is specifically warning police agencies in California along the Pacific coastline that Iran is aspiring to use them to attack in the West.
LAPD is in charge of securing the Oscars, and they have been pretty tight-lipped about exact plans this year. We've usually seen police dogs, undercover officers, SWAT teams, drones, and sharpshooters in position. They're scanning from the ground, rooftops, and the air. Responses to potential threats have been mapped out. On Hollywood's biggest night, officers say they're prepared for anything, from protesters blocking traffic to more sinister plans. Concrete barriers and fencing have been in place for days, blocking cars and pedestrians from accessing the red carpet area.
No one wants to fight for Israel!
In a chaotic scene, law enforcement officers can be seen subduing an anti-Israel protester who began fighting at a hearing at the U.S. Capitol, according to a lawmaker. Dramatic video of the incident shows the protester, later identified as Green Party Senate candidate Brian McGinnis, resisting multiple Capitol police officers, trying to remove him as he refused to let go of a door before his arm appears to snap in gruesome fashion.
Because the guy that's going to take the fall for Iran, and there will be someone who takes it, is Pete Hegseth. Pete Hegseth is going to get fired like you've never seen somebody fired. They will drop him like a bad habit. He's already dying because they have to admit now that it was our cruise missile that killed those children. You know, they've done the investigation and we committed murder. That's on Hegseth. Pete's going to get fired. What I'd like to see is Pete get fired, get arrested, prosecuted, and executed because he has committed a death penalty crime. He's violated the law of war. And we have a law. The Congress has passed the War Crimes Act. And he's committed a war crime, straight up. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. He created the conditions for a cruise missile to hit a school. He's the one that stopped the program that's supposed to prevent this from happening. He did it personally. Why? To be more lethal. There's intent. There's intent. What was your intent in doing that? To be more lethal. Well, damn, you're pretty damn good. You killed 186 kids.
Yeah, baby. It's episode 73 of The Whiners on March 12th, 2026. Jeff Norman, Ryan Milton, and Morgan with you as we always are on Thursday nights. And tonight our special guest is Matt Ho. Matt is a former United States Marine Corps captain and State Department officer. Currently, he's a senior fellow at the Eisenhower Media Network. And I should also mention that in 2022, he was a candidate for U.S. Senate in North Carolina for the Green Party, as is Brian McGinnis, who we saw in the opening. Marine veteran, Green Party, running for U.S. Senate. Not only that, Anthony Aguilar is an Army veteran running for U.S. Congress in North Carolina.
That's good.
Green Party ticket.
More candidates.
Is there something in the water in North Carolina?
Well, also too, Michael Dublin is running for Congress in North Carolina as a Green Party candidate, and he was a U.S. Marine as well.
Mm-hmm.
So what you're saying is my research was substandard.
No.
I missed one.
I would say that maybe what Matthew is saying is that this Green Party is not the same as the one in Europe.
I guess not.
There are a lot of differences, and particularly the militarism to which much of the Green Party in Europe has embraced is certainly not what the Green Party here in the United States stands for. So
that's very interesting. Yeah, I saw a lot of people promoting the Green Party wins in the UK. That's why I thought there was similarities there. So that's interesting.
Yeah, well, with the UK, there's much greater similarity, but particularly with the Greens in continental Europe, especially say the German Greens, there was a very real break 5 years ago with those parties, with their departure from an anti-militarism stance, an embracer of war, an embracer of arms sales, an embracer of Keynesian militarism will help us rebuild our economies, as well as to everything that goes with the Ukraine war. Annalisa Baerbock, who was the German foreign minister, is the prime example of that. She's also now the president of the United Nations, and at some point she will have a prominent role when she leaves that mostly ceremonial post at the UN. I'm sure she'll go back to EU and either have a big role in either Germany or within the EU.
Now, before we talk about German Lebensraum, how about what are people drinking tonight? Because we know the Green Party in Germany is talking about Lebensraum. So
I can't speak for people.
How
I can't
about
speak I can't speak for amphibians either, actually. But I can speak for me. Let's take that comment off. Sorry about that. With the cost of gasoline skyrocketing and perhaps all sorts of economic pain on the horizon, I have gone back to my frugal ways, and I purchased a bottle of wine for $4.97. I had a great Nero de Veau the other day at a wine dinner that was expensive, so I don't think this one's going to be as good, but that's reality. I have to adjust to circumstances. What about you guys?
Well, I'm adjusting too. So I went and got something from my grocery store that is, I've had this a few times before. It's pretty darn good for a cab for $15. So, yep. But, I feel it too. That, what is it? Almost 50 cents up on the gas prices. So, right. And you, Matt, Morgan, you're not drinking. Matt, are you?
No, I'm having tea.
Yeah, I have. Wow. I mean, but I'm sure, Morgan, I imagine your tea is probably some nice blend or something healthy,
it's
right?
It's ginger, because I've had this cough that I can't shake. But no, it's not like a loose leaf fancy tea. I wish, but
okay. All right. Well, that makes me feel better because I'm drinking just instant coffee. So
I feel that I can drink coffee late at night and it still won't affect me.
Military roots. Do you put Tabasco in that too?
No. Sometimes if I'm really feeling it, though, I might throw a dash of cinnamon in there. But no Tabasco in my coffee.
We already have a question from the audience for Matt. This is from Somerville John. That's Somerville, North Carolina. I'm sorry, Somerville, South Carolina. And All I can say to you, John, is you're lucky that we in North Carolina let you use half of our name. So just watch yourself. Matt, he's asking, does the Green Party in North Carolina support electric cars?
Sure. And I should be clear that I'm actually not a member of the Green Party. I'm registered independent, and I have no role in the Green Party other than encouraging independent candidates or third-party candidates rather than supporting, the duopoly. But no, certainly the Green Party is very supportive of electric vehicles. In general, they're supportive of electrification. They have the Green Party rolled out in 2012, I believe it was, the Green New Deal, which people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez took ownership of later. But certainly the idea of electrification, using EVs in particular, is something that the Green Party endorses.
All right. Well, we have a lot of questions for you. We should try to get to as many as possible in the limited time we have. How about maybe if we start with something from the opening? Scott Ritter from last night's Ask the Inspector said that Pete Hegseth is guilty of a war crime, and that would be for the missile attack on the school that killed, how many children was it?
It's like over 150,
168, I think.
Do you agree with Scott?
And they're blaming the Iranians for using their tomahawks against the school.
Something, the Iranians do not have. But I have never seen an effort like this to debunk the story of a missile strike like I've seen. Just the number of media organizations, the number of international organizations, just even the U.S. military itself coming out so quickly to take ownership of this massacre. I don't think I've ever seen anything like this. Yet we have an administration, we have a president who claims he doesn't know about it, or he claims that the Iranians have these tomahawks. Maybe they're not real tomahawks. Maybe they're, fake hawks. I don't know what you call them, but like the
something
idea
from
being,
Timu.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the idea being that this was anything other than an American missile strike is I've never seen the clarity to which people have come to on this so quickly, including the U.S. military, which has told reporters that, yes, it was us that did this. And as Scott was detailing, and Scott's the best person to talk to about these types of things. He understands the mechanics and the dynamics of these weapons, the forces that they unleash, how they work, much better than I ever did. But certainly, what Pete Hegseth has said, not just in this case, but for the entirety of the war, is going to be Exhibit A if he ever does stand for war crimes, right? If he's ever in the dock at The Hague, which I don't think is ever going to happen, but say he were, his own statements would be Exhibit A, which demonstrate the intent, right? That these were deliberate, that these were orders, that these were part of a systematic policy to carry out harm to civilians. And so certainly, and now you're showing like all his tattoos, which, a lot of those identify him also as a Christian nationalist and everything. But essentially his, the way he speaks, the way he romanticizes violence, the way he declares rules of engagement and other things as silly or for the weak, or however he describes all this, as if he's channeling some crazy version of or mixture of Yosemite Sam and Goebbels. I think what you're seeing here is a demonstration of intent and articulation of intent that, the reason why that's important, and I'm not sure if Scott talked about this, is because when you have someone in the chain of command, like a Secretary of Defense, saying these types of things, it is not just giving latitude to the U.S. military to carry out war crimes, it's directing them to do so. They're the most senior figure in the Department of Defense is saying, my intent, my goal, what I want to see happen is mass violence, mass killing, and I don't care about the rules. Well, that's just not, again, providing latitude, but that's also providing direction. And that's why this aspect of war crime, the adjudication of war crimes is so important. The understanding that the intent of it is what really matters. Like, was this meant as something that was to be done as part of policy? And in this case, absolutely, you're seeing that.
Yeah, I found this pretty strange with the when they're on Air Force One. Excuse me, I have this cough that's kind of disrupting my voice. And Trump says that he doesn't know. Excuse me. But Pete Hegseth came out and said that, oh, we're investigating it. It all seems very strange, where Trump kind of comes out and he denies that it happened, but you have Hegseth himself almost kind of in this remorseful way say, oh, we're looking into it, as opposed to kind of this warrior ethos that he likes to portray, where it's like, so what if we did kind of thing, which I found very strange. But also the added element that it seemed very Israeli. And I know that Israel, it appeared that it was claimed to be Israel's strike at the very beginning. But now we're coming out that it was AI that has brought some of these locations to why we're striking Iran. I think there was a playground that we struck, a boys' school that we struck, and then now this girls' school that had the highest casualty rate, which the scene of the crime is Peter Thiel, which Peter Thiel was the big proponent of lavender, which a lot of civilians in Gaza were murdered by AI systems as well. What is your thoughts on the whole Pete Hegseth and the Air Force One situation? Does that strike you as weird as well, or is that just normal?
No, it did. Particularly what you pointed out there, Morgan, how he was kind of a bit of a shrinking violet in the background there. He wasn't his usual self. He wasn't usually the bravado, the chin out, shoulders back, type of pose that he usually strikes. He kind of answered the question, with just a very almost passively, almost very weakly. I felt as well that I think he understood that we did do this, and this is, but the point you were making, though, you brought up about Anthropic, about AI, certainly this fear that many people have had about the automation of warfare is something that we are seeing. We are in the era. It's begun. And the idea that these people in power are going to reverse that is absolutely, that's foolish to think so. We've seen across the board, though, just one thing I saw earlier today, the International Red Crescent. So the Iranian Red Crescent Society published data on how many buildings have been struck in Iran so far. And so far, more than 20,000 non-military buildings have been struck in Iran. More than 17,000 of those have been residential buildings. So what we're seeing essentially with the strikes that have been highlighted, like the destruction of the school, the killing of that girls' volleyball team, like a few other instances, are just some of the instances that we've been able to see. And so the scale of the attacks on the Iranian people, I don't think we're fully comprehending. And we know that the Israelis have their Dahiyya doctrine, which is a military doctrine that the Israelis have used, of course, against the Palestinians, but also against the Lebanese. And this doctrine is a doctrine that essentially declares that civilian casualties are the objective, that the purpose of the military strikes are to terrorize the population, the idea that you will immiserate the population so badly that they will give up. And if you cannot get that, then at least the moral victory for your side of killing your enemy will be there. And we already know that the Israelis have spoken about bringing the Dahiyya doctrine to Iran. And certainly if these numbers from the Iranian Red Crescent are correct, about 17,000 residents being hit in less than 2 weeks' time, then we've probably already seen the Dahiyya doctrine being implemented in some way or form by the Israelis. And I think the Americans, as we were talking about, with this type of leadership, it may not be as formal as the Israelis. It may not be a stated doctrine, but there certainly is that understanding when you have people like Donald Trump or Pete Hegseth talking in the way that they do.
Matthew, what you are outlining reminds me. So I've been reading James Bradley's book called Precious Freedom about the Vietnam War. It's a novel. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. I've been recommending it to a number of people. He wrote the Flag of Our Fathers. And of course, one aspect of the Vietnam War was the body count, because it was, the body count was going to get Vietnam to eventually surrender. I think it was so a couple days ago, Harlan Ullman, who co-authored the shock and awe doctrine of the Cheney era terror plan on Iraq, has come out and said that President Trump's unconditional surrender plan could basically work if we had strategic bombing, but it's only worked one time. Now, my question, and there's a whole article where he basically makes the argument for doing that in Iran right now. Now, I want to get your view on this because I have a slightly different take. I do agree with you, but I think that this is being done because there is no actual plan. Case in point, now we're having to release oil from the strategic reserve. We're seeing, the nitrogen and fertilizers and, all the oil, everything is getting ratcheted up. What do you think about that? That actually there's no plan, that they thought they could do some bully thing. It's almost a lot of stage thing. It's bloody. I'm not saying it's not destructive, but it's also failing. And so they have to look to these crazier plans potentially to bail themselves out.
And Ryan, what was the example that Ullman used that was successful? I didn't see that article.
Oh, no. He talked about Japan in World War II, dropping the atomic bombs on Japan.
Well, that's not true.
That's what he's saying.
Yeah, he's saying that
that was successful in getting the Japanese to surrender.
Well, I tell you what, we had 9 5-star.
It's convoluted, but
yeah, exactly. And I mean, I'm not going to believe Howard Ullman, who was involved in the Iraq War. I'm going to believe what we had 9 5-star generals in the generals and admirals in the Second World War. All but one of them are on record as saying that the bombings were not militarily necessary. Were not a military necessity. We got the same surrender deal from the Japanese after we dropped the bombs as we could have gotten before we dropped the bombs. I mean, this whole thing has been debunked massively, but anyway,
I'm just saying it's the propaganda campaign.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's, you see that a lot. You see Lindsey Graham saying these types of things, saying we flattened Berlin, we flattened Tokyo, we need to do the same thing in Tehran, but to your point, Ryan, and you mentioned James Bradley. I haven't read that book yet, but I've got a personal story about him from years ago, but I do want to plug 2 of his other books. One, The China Mirage, and The White Fleet, I think was the other one. But both of those books do a really excellent job of explaining the run-up to World War II. Here's a man whose father raised the flag. He was a Marine. He raised the flag over Suribachi on Iwo Jima,
right.
And he wanted to know what was it all about. The story doesn't add up to me. That was just simply as a Manichaean struggle of good versus evil. And so he did the research, and he wrote these 2 really great books about U.S. policy in the Pacific prior to World War II. But anyway, there doesn't seem to be a plan, though. I mean, I think the hope, the strategy of hope they had was that they were going to replicate the Maduro kidnapping, in this case, do an assassination, and that the Iranian regime was going to roll over like the Venezuelan government did, and they would get regime change.
Even the New York Times admits that Iran is exacting a high price on the U.S. military assets in the region.
Right.
Well, let's talk about all the different prices. I mean, we're talking about the cost of lives in Iran. There's what we're spending on it. Matt, can you just run down off the top of your head, just to check off what the consequences are, how it's affecting our relationship with other nations?
Yeah.
Things like that.
I mean, it's you've already got an overextended U.S. military. It's displaying that we're essentially a paper tiger. Look, if we can't put the U.S. Navy within 300 kilometers of the Iranian shore 2 weeks after we began this thing, how the heck are we supposed to fight China? Isn't this the world's greatest Navy? And we can't even get 300 kilometers towards Iranian beaches? Just one thing after the other that, but then also the costs, as you were saying, Jeff and Ryan, I mean, these things are legion. So certainly the cost in terms of lives, at least 1,500 killed in Iran so far, almost 700 killed in Lebanon, dozens killed throughout the region. You have the financial costs that are running into the billions. We keep seeing different estimates. We have Republican senators saying it's $2 billion a day. We have the New York Times saying was $11.5 billion for the first week. We have a $50 billion supplemental supposedly coming to Congress, if not not tomorrow, but probably beginning of next week, as well as then thoughts that this thing is going to last for months and it will be a cost of tens of billions. But then also, too, we have economic costs. The U.S. stock market lost $1 trillion today. Gasoline before 2 weeks ago, gas was $2.95 a gallon essentially, and today it's at least $3.60 if it hasn't gone up beyond that. I mean, you're just seeing pressures across the board here, in the U.S., but also across the world. You're having these attacks on American bases in Gulf countries and throughout the region that are forcing these countries to consider whether or not this is a good deal. Is this a good relationship to be in with the U.S.? So there may be a reconsideration of the relationship between the United States and countries within the region, after this is all said and done. And we've seen, there's so many things here, right? We've seen indications from the Gulf states that they may be willing to not invest in the U.S. or may even pull some of their investments out of the U.S. And then there's another cost too. We saw a gentleman today drive his truck into a synagogue. Unfortunately, no one was hurt or killed besides that guy. We had somebody down in Austin, Texas, kill 3 people last week or the beginning of last week. So the vulnerabilities here to the U.S., this is something I wrote about last month on my Substack, that the United States is vulnerable here. One, there's the economic costs, there's the geopolitical costs, but also too, there are the physical costs here in the U.S. that we saw throughout the global war on terror, where you had attacks on the American people by men who were allied with those we were bombing and killing in the Middle East. And what they always said whenever they carry out these attacks, whether it was the guy who killed 65, 70 people at the Pulse nightclub in Florida, whether it was the guy just last year who ran over 13, 14 people, killed those people driving his truck through a crowd in New Orleans was it New Year's Eve? You had, even the ones that didn't work, the attempted Times Square bombing in 2011, and many other attacks.
Those 2 guys in New York the other day too could be lumped into this.
Yeah, they could be. I don't, it could be with those guys too. But most of the attacks we saw in the global war on terror, none of these people were saying what Lindsey Graham will tell you they said, or Fox News will tell you, which is that they're doing this because they want you to convert. They're not yelling convert or die as they kill Americans. What they're saying is stop bombing my country. That's what you see over and over again, is that these acts, these terror acts, as you want to call them that, are acts that are being carried out by those who see themselves as defending the people that we are bombing, or take it one step further, bringing the war that we are engaging in their land, in their home countries here. And so that's a very real threat. And you guys play at the beginning of the show, the clip, the FBI warnings. We always have to be careful because the government will fearmonger. This government fearmongers better than anybody else, right? But there is that why wouldn't the Iranians do that? The Iranians have made clear their objectives, and we can get into this as well.
Wow, it is 7,600 miles from Iran to California. So one of my friends posted this. Why would they go for attacking California?
Mm-hmm.
In fact, let me take that one, because since you brought it up, Matt, I did a little digging, and Ali Larijani, I think you know who he is. He's the secretary of the Supreme National Security Council of Iran. He came out and said, Trump has said we can take down Iran's electrical capacity within an hour. We haven't done it yet because I'm so good and I have a Nobel Peace Prize. But he says, if you do that, then the whole region is going to go dark. We'll do that. And look at what he says. He says that will provide ample opportunity to hunt down U.S. servicemen running for safety. I mean, that doesn't, I mean, what do you think of that?
Well, I mean, Larijani's talking about the region there, but also, too, there's no reason to think why they couldn't do that here in the U.S.
Why would they, is what I'm saying. Why would they? Why would they in the United States when they can exact a cost, you know, with the Strait of Hormuz and these other things that you've already been going through? The costs are just mounting and mounting and mounting. Saudi has to cap all the oil fields, which is a disaster of cost.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Why would they need to do that other than it's some kind of false flag threat that is coming out? Which I bet Morgan was going to say.
They want to establish deterrence. They do not want to ever go through this war again. They see this as the war to fight. That's how the Iranians see it. They have in previous iterations of conflict with the U.S. or with the U.S. and Israel, particularly say in the last few years, they have been very clear that they saw those only as temporary engagements. They saw them only at battles, that this was not. But after last June, the 12-day war, as we were calling it, the Iranians have been very consistent in what they've been saying. And they're saying if this happens again, it will be an actual war and we won't stop until we have won. And, you know, the definition of winning for them, I think, is establishing a deterrence that will prevent the United States and Israel from acting again. And how do you do that then? You know, certainly the Iranians aren't going to sail and defeat the American Navy in the middle of the Pacific or Atlantic and then invade Washington, D.C. and, take over the Capitol and everything else. But, you know, what they can do is exact such a cost, not just in the region, but around the world, that the United States will find it politically impossible to do such a war again, that it will have to change its policies because the repercussions politically from the cost of this war are so great. And the Iranians really have settled on this idea that we are going to do this through economic costs and we're going to hurt the whole world. And, you know, I mean, I don't think, you know, if bringing the war to the United States, then, of course, is they want to expose the American people to it. And, you know, how it happens with that, though, is, you know, you have and General Grinkwich, who is the commander of U.S. forces in Europe, also the NATO commander in Europe. He just testified yesterday or today or whatever and made this point that, you know, airstrikes don't ever defeat an enemy. They only ever cause the population to increase support. It unifies the population. You've seen that over and over and over again, you know. And so the idea then for Iran attacking the United States would be not thinking that the American people are going to say, oh, they're attacking us, we give up. But the idea being that it bolsters the morale of the Iranian people. But what their attack would hopefully do would cause such economic damage, cause such problems, that business leaders would say to Trump, enough, this isn't worth it. This is hurting us. So even though you're saying that ExxonMobil is making a ton of money, and we know that Boeing and Raytheon and those ghouls are making their fortunes, the rest of us are getting hurt here. And so I think that's where the Iranian strategy arrives at, to try and the pressure they're trying to put on the Americans is going to be from the world telling the Americans to stop, and certain countries turning their backs on the Americans, right? And the American business, American corporations and the wealthy telling Trump, I've lost a ton of money. We just lost $1 trillion in the stock market today. What are you doing? You know, and so making it clear that this is how any future war would be fought. If you want to see the United States go to war, be prepared to lose a lot of money. And I think that's the Iranian understanding of the United States, which I think is accurate.
And they're right. Yeah, they're right. Yeah. You know, I mean, we're talking about these children getting killed, but I don't think the average American is focusing on that. But they'll notice the price of gas going up, and they'll notice if there's a drone attack or any kind of attack here in the homeland.
That's absolutely right. And so what you see, and then we can talk a bit about objectives here. We started off saying what the heck are they objectives, and what the heck are they objectives? We don't know. I mean, this administration, say what you will about Bush and those war criminals from 20 some odd years ago, but at least they were competent liars, right? Now we're being led by incompetent liars, and so one of the things
what's the imminent threat? Well, 47 years ago.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. Tom Cotton, actually, the senator from Arkansas, actually wrote that out. He wrote out on a tweet or an X post, Iran has been an imminent threat for 47 there
It's a novel definition of imminence.
Right. So there is a genius in all this. And I think there is something we do have to address, is that unlike, say, George W. Bush, Donald Trump will change his mind. He's open to changing his mind. And that's not because he's an open-minded person, but because he has no beliefs. He has no principles. He's unmoored. He's unhinged. The only thing that matters.
They say he listens to whomever the last person he talked to is. So right. On that point, who is he listening to? That Tulsi Gabbard apparently is against the war, but is not saying it publicly. So perhaps her. Is there anybody else that's talking to him who we would want to be talking to him?
Iced out. I think she's iced out. I think that's it was like a rumor. It was like DNI was for do not invite.
Yeah. Want to hear something terrible? Is that in 2018, I stood in front of the Capitol with her and the late Walter Jones as they introduced a resolution for the House of Representatives that would make impeachment proceedings automatic for any president who exercised military force without congressional authorization. That's a Tulsi Gabbard I worked with 7-8 years ago.
Right. And people should know Walter Jones was hot for the war, and he was the guy that said, we're so angry the French won't join us, we're going to change the name to Freedom Fries from French fries. And then he figured it out, and he realized it was a lie.
He had a road to Damascus type experience. He literally was dry. He went. Walter Jones, who represented Camp Lejeune in North Carolina, Camp Lejeune being the largest Marine Corps base in the country, and Walter Jones, who, as Ryan said, was all for the war in Iraq, and then he started going to the funerals, and then the thoughts in his head, putting the dots together, or the dots don't connect. Actually, I think it's probably what happened. And he started asking questions, and then he became
incredible.
Along with Ron Paul, the fiercest critic of the war, and John Boehner hated Walter Jones. And they tried to primary him a number of times. And the people of his district in North Carolina, Camp Lejeune, the Marines and sailors there, they kept voting him back into office, even though he was anti-war. Right. He passed, unfortunately, in 2019. Great man. He was I'm lucky to say he was a friend of mine. He was very supportive of me. But this whole idea that there is no policy here, that the plan might have been that maybe we're going to do what we did in Venezuela, except this time we're going to kill the guy, and then it didn't work, and then they're all looking at each other.
Morgan thinks that Tulsi is not being listened to now. Is there anybody in the administration who we might have a little optimism for having?
Not that I can think of, Jeff.
Oh, man,
not the ones that has his ear. I think Susie Wilds. She's the one who's really got his ear. That's his press secretary. Not his press secretary. What's her?
His chief of staff, and chief of staff, and she, along with Vance, supposedly last year, were the ones who were urging restraint on all this. Vance says it seems like Vance has decided that the only way I'm getting an endorsement in 28 is if I agree with everything this guy says. And Wiles, I'm not sure where she is on it now, but certainly if she's the lone voice, her voice is obviously lost out. But he's just surrounded by a cadre of people that are just like him. Right. So con men and con women, people who learned, who succeeded because they understood the corrupt, political and media environment of this country, and they climb the ladder that way, or they're just sycophants and loyalists and they'll do whatever he asks. I mean, that's another difference between now and say 2003 is that Bush was surrounded by ideologues. He was surrounded by a neoconservative core. I mean, he was surrounded by the men who wrote the clean break strategy and were the founding members of the Project for a New American Century, the very people whose ideas about remaking the Middle East began with overthrowing the government in Iraq. So that was the ideologues he was surrounded by. Trump is not surrounded really by anyone with that type of principle or ideology or commitment. I mean, Pete Hegseth, you showed him with all his tattoos. Yeah, he's got some type of Christian nationalist, crusader fantasy going on in his head. But I don't think he's writing any policy papers based off of that, right?
And the problem exists on the geopolitical level as well, too, not just within our country. Colonel McGregor was interviewed by Rachel Blevins today on her show, and he was saying Putin and leaders of other countries don't trust anybody in the Trump administration anymore. And he thinks we need some kind of an intermediary to negotiate. Do you know who he suggested?
Who was this? Doug McGregor?
Yeah. He suggested Modi as an intermediary because he gets along with Iran and he also gets along with Russia. Kind of makes sense.
Does, yeah. Yeah, he does. And Trump seems to like him. They seem to have a certain kinship with each other. And this question of trust. Yeah, I mean, it's who would trust the United States? I mean, that's another reason why how's this war going to end? The Iranians are never going to trust the United States again. We and the Israelis attacked them twice during negotiations within 1 year. I mean, so there's no way and then let alone look at the Gulf states, the way that they, particularly with this president, I feel that the Gulf monarchies, if you all remember was it May when Donald Trump went to go visit Saudi Arabia and Qatar and the Emiratis, and just, they rolled out the red carpet and they had him in his marble palaces, and the Qataris gave him a plane and they invested hundreds of billions of dollars. They pledged hundreds of billions of dollars to the United States in investments. I think they thought that they were solidifying a relationship with President Trump that would equal the Israeli relationship. And that certainly is not the case. And now they see their countries being attacked. They see the United States with no plan whatsoever. They are the ones who this is costing the most. Ryan, as you were saying before, they're shutting down their production. The consequences to them are incredible. And they've been hosting these bases largely against the will of their people. These are monarchies that, by and large, don't have a great amount of political support. Some are rather really tenuous, like in Bahrain, where they have a Shia majority that were brutally suppressed in 2011. And there's reports that they just bust in Jordanian soldiers to try and keep the crowds at bay in Bahrain. I mean, so you have the situation.
Right.
Yeah.
I've seen pictures of people in Bahrain throwing Molotov cocktails riots in the streets.
Yep.
So maybe there will be a regime change.
You can juxtapose that with the video after video we see of Bahraini refineries, Bahraini oil storage facilities, ports just in flames. And this is all coming kilometers from the headquarters of the American Fifth Fleet, which is the naval unit responsible for the Middle East for the U.S. Navy, which was largely abandoned or evacuated by the American Navy. So if you're the Bahrainis, what are we doing here? How can we? They didn't even stay. And now, as their air defense missile interceptor stocks are starting to dwindle, where is the United States prioritizing resupplying its air defense missiles? It's not the Gulf monarchies. It's also not Ukraine, but it is, Israel. I mean, so there needs to be. I think with the decline of the American empire, you are always going to have this crossroads that nations around the world were going to have to reach, in the sense of, what do we do about the United States? What are we going to do about our relationship as the United States continues to become more violent? There's that expression I really like to describe the dangers that we are entering into with the decline of the American empire. The idea that a dying mule kicks hardest. right? And you see that with empires as they decline. One of the few forms of power they may have left is military power, and that's what they're going to use to maintain control, whether it's real control or just control of the narrative or their quote credibility unquote, which is a word that we know Washington D.C. loves to throw around. We have to kill those people 8,000 miles away, or what about our credibility then? You know, I mean, so this is a point that I think the Gulf monarchies have been pushed to right now of what are you going to do about the United States? Are you going to continue in this relationship with this empire that you cannot trust, that is predatory, and that will abuse you, and just as you've just been abused? Or will you, in this multipolar world, do something different? Right. And we've seen that with other nations. We've seen that with certainly institutions like the BRICS bloc. But, you know, and for other countries, too, say for Japan and Korea, where they, you know, Japan is the, I think, largest importer of fossil fuels in the world. I mean, about 95% of their oil they import. They're the second largest LNG importers in the world.
Right. And they get most of it from the Persian Gulf, right?
Well, they get, yeah, I mean, 90, I think it's 70% of their oil comes from the Persian Gulf. Only about 10 or 15% of their LNG comes from the Gulf. But that doesn't really matter because we all know it's a global market, right? So they're going to pay the cost anyhow. So it's just so even for nations like Japan or for Korea, where the United States moved its air defense systems, what we call the THAAD systems, after a whole effort that had enormous political costs to the South Koreans to put those weapon systems into South Korea 5 or 6 years ago. Now the United States is just pulling them out. I mean, so, you know, for any nation around the world, if they haven't already began seriously reconsidering their relationship to the United States, well, they better start, because it's this, they're going to be put in a position like this, whether they like it or not.
Well, Colonel McGregor said something on Rachel's show today that I would like to play a little clip from that, because it relates to this kind of despair that we feel over, well, there's nobody we can really rely on. And what he said wasn't all that specific, but maybe we can use it as kind of a jumping off point to just chat a little bit about, well, what could we do?
What we wanted as a people was ignored. So Americans have to get involved. They have to wake up. And I think they're going to wake up this time, because it's going to hurt them. It's going to hurt our standard of living, hurt our way of life, and they're going to be mad. And they need to be smart this time. The answer is not going to come from the people that are in Washington today. Impossible. You can't ask the people that created the disaster to fix it.
So does that point to these Green Party candidates?
I mean, you've got a United States that is an empire that after the Second World War got to write the rules of the world. And then it carried on with those even as that world order disappeared. So the rules that we wrote for the world following the Second World War, and that world disappears in the early 1990s, we still hold on to that. At the same time, too, our own policies, our neoliberal policies, our policies of financialization, et cetera, strong dollar policies have hollowed us out. We've sent all our manufacturing overseas. I mean, we essentially are a nation that runs off of a debt system provided for by a fiat currency, right? I mean, like, and what happens when people stop buying our debt? You know, what happens is, I think what Doug was getting at, what happens when de-dollarization, because of, say, something like a war like this, where people say we can't trust the United States, we have to turn away from them, we have to get away, find alternatives to the American system, whether it be political, economic, military, whatever. What happens then when we can't sell all of our debt? Well, then our interest rates go up, or, you know, I mean, but also too, you're going to have a devaluation of currency. And, you know, I mean, the effect that's going to happen then on the American people, you know, this way of life where already more than 60% of us are living paycheck to paycheck, it's going to get a lot harder, you know, and that's the reality we're headed towards, unless we change our ways. And I'll give credit to this administration because at least in their documentation, like the national security strategy they put out at the end of last year, this administration accepts that we are in a multipolar world. And that's so different than previous administrations. The Biden administration, Tony Blinken, Jake Sullivan, they would never, ever admit, they will never, ever admit that the United States is no longer the world's hegemon, that we are no longer have primacy. They will never give that up. They will keep a dead hand grip on that until they die. And you saw that with the way the Biden administration carried out its policies throughout the world. With this administration, at least they understand that we're in a multipolar world now, not something that's coming, but something that's here now. And you've seen it, I think, with some of Trump's policies. His emphasis on bilateral trade deals is reflective of that. His understanding that the United States no longer has the ability to control these international institutions the way it wants, as well as the idea that if we want to get a good deal that favors the United States, we need to be one-on-one with countries where we can really exert pressure on them.
Well, countries that he sees as peers, like that's not anybody in Europe, for example. So I would say, to your point, Russia and China in particular. I'm thinking about because later, the end of this month, he's going to China, and we saw the whole Alaska summit. Whatever we want to say about, the promise of the Alaska summit is dissipated. When he meets with these other leaders, he is sane. He represents something really that's quite different than what we see right now. Right. He seems like it makes him better. And
exactly.
I was thinking
that's kind of what I was going towards, where you see in their documentation, like with the national security strategy, an articulation of such an idea. And it's not an American retreat. This is not isolationism. It's not meant to make the United States more competitive. It's to make the United States able to dominate the multipolar world. That's the idea of it. So it's just a different form of empire. But you see there's a method to his madness, Ryan, right? You see that when he does those types of things. But then you see this.
Yeah.
And,
Well, I was listening to another person that I've never heard of before. His name is Einar Tangen. He was an attorney in Washington, D.C. for many years. He's lived in Beijing for about 20 years and representing something very interesting along these lines that we're talking. And I have a clip, but I want to show just a little bit of it because I think he says some interesting things along the lines of what we're talking about here. So let's see what you think.
The mistake that Washington is making is that it holds the time clock. It doesn't. Once they lit the fuse on this, Iran is the one who's going to decide when they've had enough, not the U.S. So I don't care. You take all the carrier groups out of there. You remove all your troops. You leave the local GCC countries to the tender mercies of the Iranians who believe that they were complicit in these attacks. Guess what? It continues. The Straits of Hormuz does not open up because the U.S. leaves. And Iran is, as they have said repeatedly, the U.S. is engaged in bad faith. There are 2 negotiation sessions, and the U.S. attacked during both of them. So how do you sit down with somebody, all right, and say, let's negotiate peace, when in fact they use that just as a ruse to attack you?
Now, I want to say that at the end of the interview, he makes this quote, and I don't remember who said it. He said, you can always count on the United States to do the right thing after they've tried everything else.
I think that was Winston Churchill.
I think so, but he brought that up in the context of Donald Trump, whom he is somewhat pessimistic about. But he says it is entirely possible that Trump would actually adopt something right along the lines of what Jeff is suggesting, or what you're suggesting with all these candidacies to change direction. But it's a leadership vacuum, really, that we have.
Right. And Jeff brought this up earlier about how he's the most malleable president, or he makes decisions based upon whoever was in the room with him last. And that's entirely the case here. And I think that's why this war that has many impetuses for it, right? Many different institutions and individuals are benefiting from it, right? The list of mothers and fathers of this war is quite large. To me, it all comes back to the fact that we're an empire, though. So those are all just manifestations of that. But why did the war come now? And how come it didn't come under Bush or Obama? This is a war that's been wanted for more than 4 decades. And it's because Trump is malleable. I mean, they have tried to get this war for decades now. And now they have it. And it's because even though they pushed real hard, came real close with the Bush administration, they didn't get it. The Obama administration, there's a lot of pressure on Obama to do something like this. If you read what the Obama people say about the Syrian war, particularly, I'll remember his name in a minute, but the guy who was the director of special operations and low intensity conflict in the Pentagon, what he wrote about in the Washington Post as the reason for the Syrian war from the Obama administration perspective was because the Syrian war offered the best chance to hurt Iran. So if we cause a terrible civil war in Syria, kill 500,000 people, it's not about Syria, it's about Iran. That was the Obama perspective. So even though Obama had the nuclear deal with Iran and everything, there was a lot of pressure within the Obama administration to do something like this towards Iran, but they resisted. And now, of course, you have, and Biden was, but now, of course, you have this president that, as we've said, is incredibly malleable, has no principles, has no beliefs, goes with his gut, and seems to believe whatever he's told. And he's not afraid to make things up either, too, as you opened up with, where he talked about the Iranians having tomahawks.
Did I hear in that video that gentleman say that we should not necessarily expect the Strait of Hormuz to open even if we were to withdraw?
Because he's saying that Iran is talking about exacting a price. I think what Matt was saying earlier, that this is not just a temporary battle in their mind. This is a showdown.
Well, maybe, yes, because this reminds me of a question I tried to get addressed last week with our guest, Mikey Weinstein, a grown man named Mikey. That's whatever. But I was pointing out that the decision that Congress has to make now, if they were to vote on it, is different than what the consideration was prior to attacking Iran. But he snapped at me and said he didn't want to consider it. So let me ask you, Matt, now that we're in the middle of the conflict, would you think that we should withdraw? Or what can we ask of Congress at this point?
Well, Jeff, I don't know where you're getting the middle of the conflict from, because Donald Trump clearly said we're in both the beginning of the conflict and the end of it. So I don't know where you're getting this middle stuff from. But
he's being a philosopher. He is so philosophical.
But this idea. So you're asking basically, what would they be authorizing?
What should we ask of Congress at this point? I
think the four of us would say don't fund the war. I think that's what the four of us would say. You have to end this thing, stop it now on the American side by stopping the money going towards it. But we know that's not the way it's going to go. But I think the thought that struck in my head that I hadn't really considered before was, I think part of what you're saying there, this idea that, prior to this thing starting 2 weeks ago, an idea for authorization would have revolved around the idea that it was going to be a limited of duration. It would look kind of like last year, maybe longer, maybe 3 weeks rather than 2 weeks, right? But not be something where the Iranians were not going to stop until they decided to stop. And then at what point, how do you make the Iranians stop if they won't do it on their own? And this is where you get into really scary territory now, where, okay, well, the Israelis use a nuclear weapon. I don't think the Americans would use a nuclear weapon, but I think the Israelis would use a nuclear weapon. Particularly say that this speculation about Iran having a dominance in terms of their inventories of missiles and drones is true, and that the Iranians have more missiles and drones than the Americans and Israelis have to shoot them down. And you get into week 3 or 4 or 5 or whatever, and essentially the Israelis can no longer, and the Americans can no longer defend Israel. Would the Israelis then use a nuclear weapon as a means to de-escalate the war, to end the war? I also think, too, that the Israelis would use one simply because that's the Israeli way of war. As we discussed before, the Dahia doctrine. After witnessing the genocide the last 2.5 years in Gaza, does anyone think the Israeli military or the Israeli government or the state wouldn't use a nuclear weapon? And if so, why? I mean, the Israeli court today just exonerated 5 Israeli prison guards who on video were raping a Palestinian prisoner. And they dismissed the case. I mean, that's the Israeli judicial system as well. So that's the system there throughout the entire nation, throughout the entire state is like that. Why wouldn't they use a nuclear weapon? You know, I mean,
their whole thing with Iran is they wanted to make it look like Gaza. They're doing the same thing in Beirut. You know, I think that is their ultimate goal. You kind of alluded to it, is this broader picture, which I don't view, like what we're doing in Iran is not even really about Iran. Like what we did in Venezuela is not even really about Venezuela. The day before we kidnapped Maduro, who was there making strategic contract deals? It was the Chinese. Right now with Iran, the only ships that are leaving the Strait of Hormuz are Chinese or oil ships that are going to refill China. So that's how I view this, is that even through all this destruction and carnage, a lot of people are pointing at Israel. This literally is, I put it as almost like the prelims to World War. You know, we're another world war. You're watching BRICS and NATO kind of go at it, like what we have with Ukraine and Russia. That's been a proxy war since day one. We've called that out. And even back in 2025, you had, I think, American military officials sounding the alarm that the amount of weapons that we're giving to Ukraine is putting America in a compromised spot. So top that off with how much weapons we're giving to Israel. I think you see BRICS playing this very strategic long game where it seems like they are winning at this point. You know, even though we're doing, you know, bombing schools and creating all this carnage and death and destruction, we're like the flailings of a dying mule, like you said.
Yeah. I mean, there is a lot of thought that supports that, what you're saying there, Morgan. You know, even say with Afghanistan, go back 15 years, the Afghan war. And there are those in Washington, D.C. who made the case that the Afghan war was really about China, because the Afghan war was about essentially Pakistan, and Pakistan with its relationship, you know, 5 wars with India, and the fact that we were allied with India and India was against China. You know, I mean, this like ludicrous chain of imperial thinking that, you know, people made these contortions in their heads to arrive at. And so, you know, the Afghan war justified new Ford class aircraft carriers somehow, you know. I mean, like, it just the madness, that imperial mindset, though, that infects it and makes people in Washington, D.C. want to think that they think they're playing a game of Risk. They think that they are sitting at Zbigniew Brzezinski's chessboard. They believe that the world is nothing more than that simple of a construct, and that at the end of the day, the end of your term, the end of your career, if there are more countries on the map that are shaded blue than red or whatever country, then we've won, right? It's a really fatalistic Francis Fukuyama end of history type of way of looking at the world, as if, you know, almost as if there are start and stop points, right? And it's a particularly an American way of looking at not just the world, but of history, I feel like. But certainly this idea that that there are those who see it that way. I just explained, you had to what the heck was his name? It's going to kill me because I'm going to remember when I get off. But, you know, you had the guy in the Obama administration, you know, saying that about Syria. It's not Syria. All these deaths in Syria, the 500,000 people killed, the 8 million refugees. That's not about Syria. It's about Iran, you know, for us here in this administration. And so I mean, certainly Venezuela, you saw that with this idea that Venezuela is not really about Venezuela. It is about Venezuela, but it's also about China. But certainly in Washington, D.C., you have a lot of people who get really upset when they do look at a chart and they see that the largest trading partner for most of Central and South America is China, you know, and there is an obsession with China in Washington, D.C. that goes back to the beginning of or it goes back to the end of the Cold War. I mean, certainly you saw that in the Clinton administration with Bill Clinton's actions towards the Chinese, whether it's sailing the aircraft carriers through the Taiwan Straits, humiliating the Chinese like that, or bombing their embassy in Serbia. I mean, but then too, you got to remember that Condoleezza Rice comes in as George W. Bush's national security advisor, and it's saying that China is our biggest concern. China is first on the list of priorities for me as national security advisor. And of course, Al Qaeda had something to say about that, 9 months later or whatever. But this idea of they're sitting at the grand chessboard, and that mindset. These are all men and women that are acolytes of Henry Kissinger or Zbigniew Brzezinski. That's the way they've been trained. That's how they were mentored. That's how generations before them have thought of it. That's when they all kind of go to the same schools. They all go to Harvard, or they go to Georgetown, or they go to Stanford. There's a handful of schools that produce our foreign policy elite, and they teach them all the same thing, whether they be Democrat or Republican. And it's a very imperial mindset, and it's understandable that way. But it also can be quite mad. And when you're in a war with Iran, because ostensibly the idea is you're going to shut down oil production for China that way, or oil exports to China that way, and you're going to hurt the Chinese that way. But now you're in this war that we've been talking about for an hour now, right? About how we can't win, we can't get out of it. Seems to be that we're losing it. The Iranians clearly have the initiative. It's going to have all types of long-term economic and geopolitical effects on us. And we did this because some people thought this was a good way to get at China, so I mean, it's absolute madness, but there are people who think that way. And just,
but there is one reason for optimism though, Matt, and that is the very bald man above you is going to China in a few weeks as the U.S. tour of duty ambassador to China. So maybe you can brief him on that, and hopefully they'll restore order of some sort.
Well, that's great.
Well, it'll be the end of April, and it's going to be a group of countries, Shanghai, Chengdu, hopefully Chongqing, Beijing will be on the list too. And the idea is to go and basically work on U.S. Chinese cooperation around infrastructure. Obviously, the big example because a friend of mine who is running for Congress in LA, Rob Lucero, California has the failure of high-speed rail, right? China has the success of high-speed rail. So he's going to basically go as part of his campaign to bring that back and show people what we can do here in the United States as an alternative to the current chaos.
See, look at Matt's face lighting up. I told you there was reason for optimism.
Yeah.
I mean, that's great. Yeah.
So in that context, and I had shared this with Jeff, there was a video with the Duran, Cyrus Jansen, Alex from Reportify, because I know you're saying everything's focusing on China, but Alex from Reportify, he was talking about the vast amount of derivatives financial transactions that are resting on top of things. And that's one reason that they're trying to keep this thing going. But just in a few other things that I've been reading, there's really no way to touch China per se when you look at the productive capacity.
Right.
You look at the quality of life. They just finished their 2 sessions, and that this session now, the course that they're charting is they're going to maximize the health and well-being of the population. So that's what this new 15-year, what is it? This is the 15th 15-year plan. I don't exactly know how these things go, but there's or 5-year plan, 15th 5-year plan. Yeah. So they're going to maximize health, medical care. They're going to become, in their view, the idea of the best health in the population globally. That's what they're going to do. And then there was some other aspect to it that I don't exactly remember.
That's funny, because American corporate media told me that what came out of those meetings was forced assimilation. I didn't hear anything about this taking care of their people, investing in their people, healthcare.
Right, exactly. Well, yeah. So that's the thing that's interesting.
You got to get better sources, Matt.
There was a report
Why
put
would they
out
lie
by
to me?
exactly. There was a report put out by somebody else who works in automation of textiles here in the United States, and he was describing that the middle industry, second, third, fourth tier industrial companies that use like the CNC machines, machine tools, whether you're in Germany or certainly in China, you can buy a $200,000 machine and it's $4,000 a month less. So like 200% less than for an American company. So that in 2008, when the United States decided to go bail out banks, China took the approach, we're going to create a mechanism to finance development at all layers of the economy, public financing, private financing, but in a way that small companies to medium-sized companies, not just big companies, can actually benefit and grow. And that's what we've been seeing.
Right. Yeah.
So that's the idea, is to go and bring that back into the United States conceptually.
I had in all those things you described China as doing the last 15 years, 30 years, right? These plans that they've put into place and then executed them. I had a friend of mine who went to China in 2011 met with members, met with folks in the Chinese foreign ministries and met with their diplomats. And he said very bluntly to them, one-on-one here, tell me, what would you like to see the United States do? What would help China? What could the United States do that would help China? And they all said, stay in those never-ending wars in the Middle East. Right? It's just kind of, one thing, and it's not related what you were just saying there, Ryan, but like this, I keep coming back to this idea that we've all seen the videos of the billion-dollar radar systems that the Iranians have destroyed with $20,000 drones. And I keep coming back to the idea that we can't build those things without the critical minerals we buy from China. So all these things, whether it's the missiles we're shooting over there, the JDAM bombs we're dropping, the 3 F-15s that some Kuwaiti fighter pilot shot down, like all the radars and communication systems, we can't rebuild any of that without critical minerals from China. And so the fact that we are putting ourselves in this way, the way that we're in the way that we are bullying the Chinese, poking them in the chest, and acting, I guess, as you would expect a dying empire to act, right? But it's just incredible, just the lack of.
Tell them we're sorry, Ryan. We won't do it anymore.
Well, so I just want to address this clown named Stuart in the chat. He says, "Yeah, we'll go to rural China and see what it's like over there." Have you been to rural Texas? Have you been to rural? Oh wait, you live in Las Vegas, Myanmar, Thailand, outside of Reno and Las Vegas. Have you been to most of Canada? How about go to most of Canada? It's empty, undeveloped. There's a lot of crappy places, no fast trains. I mean, there are people in Tibet that are living better than people in Nevada today because of the developments that are happening. So
we told them we'd keep it to about an hour, so maybe we should wind it down. Can we if we ask nicely, Matt, can we squeeze out of you a prediction about how this Iran-Israel-U.S. conflict is going to end?
Well, I'll caveat it, Jeff, with quoting Yogi Berra, who said predictions are hard, especially when they're about the future.
He also said it ain't over till it's over. I thought you were going to go with that.
Which is maybe that's my prediction. It ain't over till it's over.
I thought for sure that's what you're going to say.
I think I don't know. I mean, like just the way the Iranians have taken initiative, the way they've demonstrated a clear understanding of their goals and a way to achieve them. So the way they've carried out the strategic and the political levels of war. I really do think that this might be one of those really radical moments in history where this is transformative for the world, where you have a defeat of the United States and its proxy, its imperial subset, Israel, in such a manner that you do see, besides most of Europe, I think some European nations would split as well, many nations turning their back on the United States. Many nations saying, wow, we came really close to a world depression here. We really came close to many more wars. We came within sight of a third world war. And for our interests, for our own national interests, we can no longer go forward with this relationship with the United States. I think that is the prediction I would make if I have to be bold about it.
Well, I like that you're saying we came close to World War III as opposed to
close, because I think there are off ramps. I think there are off ramps, and I also think that the United States military cannot sustain a campaign longer than a few months. Our planes and ships are maintenance nightmares. We simply don't have an industry that can provide the munitions production for our forces that we would need to continue out a campaign over months or years. I mean, this is a problem with our defense industry that's systemic. This is in 2015, 2016, we ran out of bombs fighting the Islamic State. That was more than 10 years ago. And that was the Islamic State, not Iran. I mean,
so are we now vulnerable to some other potential conflict with running out of ammunition?
I mean, the big vulnerability I see right now, is the fact that Yemen hasn't entered the war. The Houthis haven't entered the war, which I find very curious. And I think
remember, we actually had a ceasefire with them, so we couldn't even defeat them.
Twice. Both the Biden and the Trump administration sent naval task force into the Red Sea, expeditionary campaigns to defeat the Houthis, take control of the Red Sea, and both the Navy, American Navy under Trump and Biden were defeated by the Houthis. We had to enter into these face-saving truce, which were essentially retreats for the American Navy. And then they thought they would be able to defeat Iran. And now it gets us, this idea that we're going to fight China someday is just insane. But yeah, I mean, I think there's that vulnerability you have. And you have to also consider, look, the Americans put the bulk of their fleet in between both the Iranians and the Yemenis. There's no access to the Persian Gulf. They have to go all the way to Diego Garcia to refit their ships. I mean, they can't use the Red Sea because the Yemenis or the Houthis have control of that, and waiting for the Yemenis to enter into the war. We saw today the first joint operation in terms of missile attacks and drone attacks on Israel by Iran and Hezbollah. I don't think that occurred on day 12 or 13 or whatever it is because Hezbollah and Iran didn't have their act together and it took them 2 weeks. I think they waited 2 weeks to carry out a joint attack. So I think the pacing in all this is under Iran's initiative. And we're seeing a very controlled response. And they're losing a ton of ships, 20,000 buildings blown up. They're losing a lot of people, but they also have got into that. This is total war. This is our World War II, if you will, right? And we have to see it through to the end. And I think the population is largely behind that. I mean, we've seen hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people turn out in the streets to mourn their dead schoolgirls, to mourn the dead Ayatollah, to celebrate the new Ayatollah. These are people who are going out under the open skies while there are American and Israeli warplanes and drones and missiles over them. And they're going out there in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, to mourn their dead girls, to stand in solidarity with their nation, but also, too, to show their defiance to the Americans and the Israelis. I tell you what, if I lived in a country where these psychopaths, the Americans and the Israelis, were bombing, I'm not going to go out and stand underneath the open sky, right? But these people are defiant and they're brave. I mean, and that's what they're up against here. And so I think there's a commitment in Iran to see this through in a way that we haven't seen from a state since, say, North Vietnam. I mean, and so that's really pretty weighty. So where this goes, I mean, war is just uncertainty. It's a breeding ground of unintended consequences. And that's why we need to avoid war at all costs, but particularly when it's a war of choice, where you've got an overextended and hollowed out military, where you're up against an adversary who is prepared for decades for this war and is fighting the war on their terms, essentially. Yeah, my prediction is that this doesn't end the way anybody in Washington, D.C. expected it would, which is the way it seems like all American wars tend to end, right?
All right. Well, thank you, Matt. Appreciate your time.
Woo, that was exciting, Matt.
Yeah.
But that's really great. Yeah, I know. I'm glad. I'm happy to be a optimist here. But that's really great. You're traveling like that, Ryan.
Yes, I'm excited about it. And we'll check out those other books that you mentioned. Let's see. I mentioned the book about Precious Freedom, and then you mentioned the other two books.
Right, the China Mirage, and I think it's the White Fleet. Okay. I think that's what it's called. It's in the other room. But yeah, both written by James Bradley, and I think it's
very book club, helpful. Jeff.
Yeah.
Book club.
Yeah,
Matt
right.
Ho.
We have a book club, so we'll add those books to it. All right, Matt, and then maybe while Ryan's in China, we can convene, and Morgan can join us too in the Raleigh area for a fabulous dinner.
Yeah, hey, you referenced the Ethiopian place in Durham. Let's do that. That'd be great.
Yeah, please.
Right.
Yeah, Morgan and I ate there. What do you say, Morgan? Should we make a return trip there this time with Matt?
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, yeah. She says sounds
Sorry,
good.
Now it's getting to me.
Yeah.
All right.
Sorry.
All right, feel better, Morgan.
Sorry.
All right.
Thank you. But yeah, that sounds good. Let's plan something.
All right. And thanks to our beloved audience. Join us Tuesday for Probable Cause. Next Wednesday, Ask the Inspector. And we'll be back next Thursday with another episode of The Whiners. Take care, everybody.